addressing is the primary use of zero tolerance in schools ethical? I'm Molly Ellis. I'm from Indiana, and I will be acting as the introducer. Jen Fiora from Idaho will be acting as a summarizer. Megan Omens from Virginia will be presenting the research, and Brittany Anderson from Indiana will be presenting the illustrations. We will first provide a little background information on the topic of zero tolerance. Then we will discuss some of the benefits of implementing the policy, followed by the stance against the policy. We will conclude our debate with a Q&A where all members will participate. The term zero tolerance originated from the federal drug enforcement policy of the 1980s. Schools then picked up the term and approach to address students bringing weapons to the grounds. The policy has now spread to various problem behaviors within the school system. Statistics have shown that juvenile crime rates have dropped significantly since the implementation of zero tolerance. However, there is no evidence proving the causal relationship between zero tolerance and the drop in crime. Another point that is taken into account is that students' learning and safety may be affected by other students' aggressive behaviors, and the zero tolerance policy diminishes these opportunities. However, the staff must keep in mind the negative effects that the zero tolerance policy has on the students with the problem behaviors. Some school staff and parents prefer zero tolerance, and it increases their feeling of safety for their children. Many professionals, such as school staff and other organizations, are actually against zero tolerance. Lastly, zero tolerance removes prejudice and discipline by providing clear guidelines to follow regardless of other students' characteristics, such as race. But as implemented, zero tolerance disproportionately targets students of certain racial backgrounds, as well as students with disabilities. Let's start the debate with Jen, who is going to give a summary of the benefits of zero tolerance.
Hi, everyone. As Molly explained, zero tolerance has been in existence in various forms since the early 1990s. It provided the schools with a firm policy and stance against the rise of drug use and other illegal and inappropriate behavior by students, particularly those who brought weapons into school or onto school grounds. If students chose to do so, they would be immediately suspended or expelled from the school. It was seen as a positive, proactive stance that would clean up schools and keep children safe. Educators and administrators, as well as parents, wanted to ensure that the schools remained safe havens with education as the main focus, rather than a place to purchase and use drugs or a place where a child could be injured with a knife or a gun. Additionally, many thought that the firm rules and clear regulations would actually help diminish prejudice against students of color by focusing on the illegal act and making the consequences the same for all students. There was even the hope that strict policies like those in zero tolerance could have a preventative effect for students who might otherwise be involved in drug or weapon use. The standards were seen as very clear and understandable by students. Many schools felt like they were taking a firm stand against the things that could potentially harm their students the most, as well as disrupt the learning of so many of the other students. Some of the issues with zero tolerance policy, according to our code, is that behavior analysts have a responsibility to stay within their scope of practice, according to Code 1.02, Boundaries of Competence. Some may argue that violent students or bringing weapons or drugs to school may be outside the boundaries of competence of some BCBAs, such as if they've not had training or supervised experience with this population. Therefore, a zero tolerance policy might be more appropriate than other interventions if this is the case. Also, behavior analysts have a responsibility to all of their clients and parties affected, Code 2.02 responsibility. So if a BCBA was working with a school on a school-wide behavior plan, they need to be confident of their ability to ensure safety of all students, including those who may commit major offenses. If a student has committed a major or violent offense and was not expelled or suspended and then harmed another student with violent acts, a weapon, or by distributing drugs, that would not be in the best interest of all students and may require more stringent action than could be accomplished by a school-wide positive behavior plan or other interventions that a BCBA might put into place. Ethically, behavior analysts have to focus on positive reinforcement before punishment procedures. However, the severity of the behavior, like bringing drugs or weapons to school, might require the use of punishment or aversive procedures, such as suspension or expulsion used in zero tolerance policies, as seen in Code 4.08, considerations regarding punishment procedures.
Thank you, Jen. Now Megan will explain some of the findings from research that discusses these ethical codes in relation to zero tolerance in schools.
Hi, everyone. Researcher Derek Mack in 2015 found that there were 3 major goals of zero tolerance when it was first being implemented. The first goal was to lessen behaviors deemed as problem behaviors. The second goal was to stop dangerous students from continuing to endanger and disrupt their classmates. And the third was to have consistency of punishments for bad behaviors across all students, in the hopes that therefore this would decrease the racial disparities and the punishment procedures within the school system. This researcher also discussed that each of these goals that zero tolerance had are legitimate goals and needs in the school system, because it is necessary to have a safe environment in the schools and an environment that promotes learning by minimizing problem behaviors. Without a safe and ordered school environment, no students will get the full benefits of the school's curriculum. And the consistency of punishment procedures across all students, regardless of race, serves to lessen the racial disparities that have previously been demonstrated in the school system. A study in 2001 by researcher Holloway found that zero tolerance policies have become a very popular discipline choice within schools. The researcher found that 9 out of 10 principals were in favor of the zero tolerance policy. And the reasoning for that was that they thought that addressing student problem behaviors is essential to keeping their schools safe. And that was why harsh disciplinary methods such as zero tolerance are necessary. Another reason stated by Holloway was that school personnel believed that it was important to have zero tolerance policies in schools is because when school officials fail to enforce punishments for students' behavioral misconduct, the students assume sometimes that they are receiving permission to engage in these problem behaviors. Therefore, having a standard established for what happens to you if you engage in certain bad behaviors was thought to be good for the students at schools because it served as a standard of punishment for the bad behaviors that was clear to everyone and delivered equally among all students. According to researchers Mongan and Walker in 2012, the zero tolerance weapons policies in schools began after the Gun-Free Schools Act of 1994. This act was a pivotal piece of legislation that forced the school system to take action to adopt a zero tolerance policy for weapons in schools. Studies showed that the number of homicides in schools was cut in more than half after the Gun-Free Schools Act of 1994 was implemented, and as a result of studies that were conducted 4 years after its implementation. And this is important because homicides are arguably the most extreme form of violence that do occur in the schools. There was 34 and 29 victims of school homicide 2 years before the Gun-Free School Act of 1994 was implemented. And then in the year of 1999 to 2000, the amount of homicides in schools was at a record low of only 14 homicides, which is obviously an extreme decrease compared to the incidence of 34 and 29 victims prior to the introduction of this piece of legislation. In 2008, a member of the Educational Issues Department at the American Federation of Teachers, this group supports zero tolerance when having to do with severe problems such as drugs, bringing weapons to school, and extreme violence in the school. According to a study in 2005, provisions in the Gun-Free Zone Act allow for superintendents to review and modify expulsions at a case-by-case basis. So looking at our Ethics Code Section 1.02, with this, the school personnel can decide whether the behavior exhibited and the specific student being examined with the behavior is within their competency, and whether they are able to manage the behaviors exhibited by the student on their own based on their experiences, or whether they need to seek outside help. Also, in the Gun-Free Zone Act, schools will provide alternative education for students that engage in problem behaviors. This will be provided with other educational opportunities, because we as behavioral analysts have responsibility to the other students to keep them safe and out of harm's way, which may result in the need to suspend or expel a student that's exhibiting dangerous behaviors according to zero tolerance policies that the teachers can't handle. One study by researcher Gray in 2005 found that after teachers received 90 hours of supervision in ABA, they were able to decrease the occurrence of target problem behaviors in the classroom. This, in relation to zero tolerance, shows that if teachers do not have training on problem behaviors, they may not be functioning within their boundaries of competence. And therefore, it would be necessary to remove the student by expulsion or suspension, depending on the behavior, because the teachers do not have the experience to deal with such behaviors. And it is their duty to function within their competence. There were some limitations to this research on the pros of zero tolerance, such as that much of the research dates back more than 5 years. This is because we had to examine research closer to when the zero tolerance policies were first implemented.
Thanks, Megan. Now Brittany will provide illustrations and graphs that show the decrease in violence in schools when zero tolerance was implemented.
Okay, everyone. I'm first going to present some graphs that support pro-zero tolerance policies. This chart demonstrates the decrease in homicides and non-fatal crimes against youth since the zero tolerance policies have been implemented. This suggests that zero tolerance policies have helped with the lowering of crimes against students. This first graph displays homicides at school among youth ages 5 to 18 from 1992 to 2006. As you can see, about 1998, there was a huge drop in homicides, going from 35 in 1992 to 1993 to almost 0 or under 10 in 2000. While there was a rise in about 2003, 2004, has a steady decrease down to 2005, 2006. The graph below shows non-fatal crimes against students ages 12 to 18 from 1992 to 2005. It started at about 150 per 1,000 students in 1992 and decreased to about 50 per 1,000 students in 2005. The second graph also supports the decrease of youth violent crimes. From 1986 to 2012, there's still a steady decrease in violent crimes of youth. This also correlates with the Gun-Free Act law that Megan described in 1994, where in all of these graphs there's a decrease from 1994 down.
That concludes.
Oh, there's still more. I was getting off the screen share. Okay, next I'll go over the opinions of Alyssa Sellers from Demand Media on why many individuals support zero tolerance policies. The first reason is to have a uniform district-wide approach to both discourage disruptive behaviors and maintain a safe school and learning environment for teachers and students. It also removes difficult students from the classroom, promoting better education for the other students and less disruption. Zero tolerance policies are a fast-acting intervention that sends a clear message to all students of what is acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. Teachers are especially supportive of zero tolerance policies that help with classroom management and keep their workplace safer. It is the responsibility of schools to protect teachers and students while also addressing inappropriate or dangerous behaviors that affect other students. Another reason Alyssa Sellers from Demand Media suggests that people support a zero tolerance policy is that it can regenerate urban environments, reducing the amount of dead ground. Dead ground is like free time, so gym, lunch, a recess, which can be used for drug dealing or protecting schools from vandalism. It also raises the standard of living in high crime areas, which is a major goal, and zero tolerance policies may send the necessary message to improve those areas. Okay, that's all I have for the opinions.
So that concludes the benefits of the zero tolerance policy. Jen will now provide a summary of the cons of zero tolerance.
Okay, thanks, Molly. Although zero tolerance policies were put into place to make schools safer environments where students could focus on learning, they ended up having some unintended side effects. In many cases, students were not necessarily safer. There has not actually been a reduction in reports of students bringing weapons to school. School success also does not appear to be linked to schools with zero tolerance policies. And in some studies, these policies may actually increase disruption in the classroom, which does not help the other students focus on education. Even worse, utilizing zero tolerance policies may introduce additional students to the juvenile justice system. In some schools, zero tolerance policies, which were meant to be applied to serious crimes such as bringing drugs or weapons to school, are applied to student acts of insubordination rather than the other crimes that pose a danger to their classmates. Therefore, in many cases, zero tolerance may have ended up being used by schools as more of a catch-all for student misbehavior rather than as a tough stand for dangerous and serious actions. Having a suspension or expulsion on their record may increase a child's risk of becoming involved in the juvenile justice system or dropping out, which can lead to many other adverse side effects such as fewer job opportunities and or lower pay with those jobs, or even continued issues in the legal system. Additionally, implementing zero tolerance policies may encourage teachers and other administrators to adopt a much more rigid approach regarding behavior issues. Instead of working to de-escalate behavior, their attitudes may serve to maintain and increase negative behavior by students, which can lead to negative outcomes for both the individual students and for the school. When we look at our code of ethics, behavior analysts, according to 1.01 reliance on scientific knowledge, have a responsibility to implement interventions that are backed by evidence. At this point, the evidence does not support the use of zero tolerance procedures as they're currently being used. According to 2.09 treatment/intervention efficacy, behavior analysts have a responsibility to ensure their clients have access to effective treatment. If zero tolerance policies are not effective as they are currently being implemented, then they are not effective treatment, particularly for students with disabilities. We talked before about 4.08 considerations regarding punishment procedures. Behavior analysts ethically do have a responsibility to focus on positive reinforcement before punishment procedures. The way they're currently used, zero tolerance policies focus mainly on punishment procedures. behavior analysts need to try least restrictive procedures. Many zero-tolerance offenses, such as those for insubordination, could be dealt with in a manner that is much less restrictive than a suspension or an expulsion from school. In addition, children need to be taught replacement behaviors to address the function of their problem behavior so that the problem behavior doesn't simply reoccur.
Thanks, Jen. Megan will now be providing research on the cons of zero tolerance.
Thank you. So the biggest issue with zero tolerance support. According to research by the APA Zero Tolerance Task Force in 2008, no studies showed that classroom disruption was actually decreased by increasing the suspension or expulsion for individuals engaging in the behavior of a disruption. Another piece of research by Mitchell and Bradshaw in 2013 found that zero tolerance may actually increase disruption, which is counterintuitive to the purpose of zero tolerance policies in the first place. Researchers Fabello and others in 2011 and King Brown and others in 2013 found that school success reports and studies that have shown zero tolerance as being successful in decreasing problem behaviors actually have no correlation, and that the school success is not related to the rates of expulsion and suspension occurring in the schools because of the zero tolerance policy. A problem with zero tolerance that researchers Roberts and others and King Brown and others found in 2013 is that oftentimes severe punishment methods, including expulsion and suspension, have been given to students for less severe offenses, which may show the inappropriate nature that has come about because of these policies. The researchers found that 43% of expulsions and suspensions that lasted at least 1 week nationwide were for insubordination, which is not a severe offense. King Brown and others also found that none of the research on zero tolerance has actually shown that threatening students with zero tolerance policies, such as suspension or expulsion, actually decreases the likelihood that students will bring weapons into schools. These researchers also found that there are significant adverse effects of zero tolerance, such as that students are more likely to drop out of school or be alienated when they come back to school, or even become involved in the system as a result of these harsh policies. Big associations such as the American Psychological Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics have issued statements against the use of zero tolerance, which suggests a strong non-favor for these policies amongst professionals in these organizations. In conclusion of the research, one researcher, Tusk, in 2011 found that the overuse of suspensions and court referrals overall actually led to a decrease in the amount of students graduating and was not helpful in decreasing challenging behaviors in students, but actually had the opposite effect when having to do with safety in the schools and safety in the community.
Thank you, Megan, for that research. Now Brittany will provide the illustrations.
Okay. The first graph that I will show you is a graph about a research study done with mental health professionals. The first group was just trained on how to handle physical aggression and violence. The second group was trained on how to deal with physical aggression and violence and also zero tolerance policies. The zero tolerance policy defined that it was not their job to deal with violence, it was their management. As you can see, after the intervention of the zero tolerance policy, group 2 had an increase rigidity on their views of violence and physical aggression. They also had a lower tolerance of dealing with physical aggression and violence. However, they had an increased confidence and an increased set of skills in their personal opinions. But if you look at group 1, who received just the training on how to deal with physical aggression and violence, they had a reduced, rigid view on physical aggression and violence, had a better tolerance, increased confidence, and a better set of skills to deal with zero tolerance or deal with physical aggression. The second graph is on racial gap widening for suspension. This chart illustrates the racial disparities of suspension rates since zero tolerance has been implemented. It demonstrates that Black students are now way more likely to be suspended than whites, Hispanics, Native Americans, or Asian Pacific Islanders. Next, I will go over personal opinions of zero tolerance. In a research article by McNeil and Dunbar, 2010, policies on rural communities versus the behaviors it addresses in large urban settings. A quote that they've taken from an urban student named Lady says that zero tolerance is ineffective in our high schools because they don't have enough security guards, and that her school has about 4 security guards in a school population of 3,000 students. There are not enough security guards. The shortage is due to deficits in the budget that has been overused. So, in conclusion, even students and staff found that zero tolerance policies were not always implemented as they were meant to be. Students have been suspended for having a toy gun or expelled for having an aspirin on hand when the policy was meant for physical aggression and violence, putting others in danger, and illegal drug use.
This concludes our debate, and we are going to move on to the Q&A section before we present our closing statements. First question is for Megan. Why do you think schools continue to implement zero tolerance policies despite there being a lack of research to support them?
Well, this is likely due to the fact that some community members, parents, and even teachers like the idea of zero tolerance. It feels like a hard stance against illegal activities, even though it has not worked out that way. Also, change requires motivation, support from administration and community members to do appropriate training. It is possible that some schools and/or administrators may also feel as though they are admitting that a policy was not effective or that they could be viewed as soft rather than tough in their stance against drugs and other illegal activities.
Okay, thank you. The second question is for Jen. What other policies or interventions could be implemented to help ensure student safety other than zero tolerance?
Good question. And I think that really comes down to the heart of the debate is what else can we do? And one thing that the APA Zero Tolerance Task Force suggested was teacher training as an alternative to zero tolerance policies. And we've heard a little bit about that during this debate about how things like training teachers to deal with behaviors effectively, as well as giving them ABA background, makes them feel more confident and be better able to deal with those behaviors. As well as giving them more flexibility in their thinking instead of adopting a more rigid attitude about the students. Another thing that could be done that we've discussed is school-wide positive behavior support programs. So the APA Zero Tolerance Task Force also found that programs with high levels of student support and community could reduce disruption in schools. And if you implement your school-wide positive behavior support plan appropriately, it should include very high levels of student support. Another thing that schools could do is reduce offenses for zero tolerance. We've heard about kids, having strict consequences, for things like insubordination. And really, it needs to be actual things like actual weapon or drug offenses. And it also requires redefining weapons. A kid that brings a toy gun to school might not be dealt with in the same way that a child who brings a handgun. And also maybe redefining what that is. Is an aspirin going to be in the same category as a more, an actual dangerous illegal drug? Also, judging kiddo situations on a case-by-case basis and in a developmentally appropriate manner would help. Another thing schools can do is use threat assessment procedures to determine what steps they need to take next, and also attempt to establish a school bond and reconnect with students who do feel alienated. School violence and juvenile delinquency have both been found to be linked to school alienation, according to the APA Zero Tolerance Task Force. The final thing, and it sounds really obvious, but increasing communication with team, family, and other professionals involved in the child's life can do a lot of good to help students more than a suspension or expulsion could.
Thank you for that answer. The final question is for Brittany, and it is, do you have any personal experiences related to this topic that you would like to share?
I do. I've had a few clients that one, not being allowed back at school due to teachers not being able to handle problem behaviors such as running, physical aggression, spitting. So they've been referred to a clinic setting versus a school setting where they attend therapy all day versus going to school. My other experience is with a teenage girl who engages in physical aggression, which results in suspension or expulsion. But the function of the behavior is boredom. So if there is a better intervention plan to prevent the boredom, I don't think that physical aggression would occur.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us. Our closing statement is, all in all, based on the lack of empirical research supporting zero tolerance and evidence supporting possible harmful long-term consequences, schools should focus on individual treatments of cases, including alternatives to suspension and expulsion, such as individual behavioral intervention as a part of school-wide positive behavior support, increased teacher training in positive behavior techniques and discipline procedures, increased communication and collaboration with members of the child's team, and increased school connections for at-risk students. This concludes our debate. Thank you for watching.